It shall record. Wonderful. Okay, I will share my screen and give you a bit of an overview what we're doing today. So first of all, before even starting off, my name is Frank, as I introduced myself before, and I'm calling in today from the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation in Australia. That's a place called Melbourne. I'm not geographically too far away from Stuart, who is just a quick ditch across over in Tasmania. As we said, for today, or as Valentina introduced, we're gonna give you guys an overview on tool and guidance that we have developed over the course of the last year in this project together with the Nature Conservancy. Before we start off, you have on this call simultaneous translations. If you click in the Zoom toolbar on your screen on the little globe icon that has the interpretation, underneath, you should be able to choose a channel and either listen to us talking in English and what the plenary will be in, or alternatively jump across to Spanish translations. What we have planned for you is pretty straightforward. We've already worked through the welcome and introduction bit. I give you a very brief project background. A lot of you have been already on our previous webinar, so you would have seen that, so I'll keep it really short. And then focus my part of the presentation in particular on presenting some of the outcomes that we have developed over the course of the last 12 months, and talk a little bit about principles and practices we identified for, to support community-led conservation. And then Stuart and Valentina and myself, we're gonna run 3 breakout sessions with you guys where we will present 2 tools. You will be wondering, how can we do 3 breakout sessions for 2 tools? For that, Valentina and I will run 2 simultaneous sessions in breakout rooms in English and Spanish for tool 1, and Stuart will work in the plenary with live translation, introducing the second tool. And then once we come back from the breakout sessions, we want to just quickly do some general feedback and talk about next steps and how people can provide feedback after the session and so forth. So that's a little bit what we had in mind for the next 80 or 75 minutes or so. And let's get into it. If there are any technical issues along the way, Stuart and Valentina will be your first call to go to, and maybe just send them a quick private message in the chat, and they will be able to help you out. During the breakout session, we will be working in Miro, and we will be sharing a link to our Miro board just before we jump into the breakout session. So why are we here today? We all know, I guess, the important role that Indigenous people and local communities are playing in global conservation as stewards of their land, water, and ice for millennia, and having looked after those territories so well that they are now havens for biodiversity. And this important role is definitely reflected that there has been more and more guidance developed on how you partner with Indigenous people. But when the Nature Conservancy and us started this conversation, we realized there is actually very little guidance and associated tools on how we can adapt our planning and adaptive management to really foster equitable, self-determined conservation that is led by local communities and Indigenous people. And from this kind of a lack or / gap, this project came about where the Nature Conservancy, and we've heard from Sebastian, Christina, and Brandy, and they started this project together with us from CCNet and Stuart from our Common Place to develop those resources and tools that are in support of planning and implementation. We are a consortium. We are stretched across the planet, and we work and we rely as well on our great community of practice and our general community of conservation practitioners as part of CCNet, who provided us with a lot of really helpful input and information to get us to this point. So in order to achieve community-led conservation, there needs to be a shift in the way how we approach conservation, and a shift that allows us to properly honor Indigenous and community leadership and the efforts they put in and the efforts they will put in into the future, looking after all those important areas. And those principles of planning should be a starting point to initiate this shift of how we honor Indigenous people better. We are very, very much aware that principles and standardization is a great thing, and it can be a very good starting point. But we are also aware that the local context in every project is unique and hence needs to be considered in the first instance. So what we're saying here does not mean there is a stock standard approach we can use. First of all, always consider the local circumstances. But what we're talking about and what we're showing you should be a starting point to inform your practice and to adjust it to the specifics of the geography you're working in. When we talk about this project and when decided the deliverables, we kind of landed on 4 big things that we've been developing over the course of the last 12 months. There is a document, a first document that is more of a foundational document that talks about the principles. This is something that ideally somebody reads early on in their, I guess, in their work career, or when they start engaging, when they first start working in projects that collaborate with Indigenous people in local communities. So this is a foundational thing. It has a perspective of it, looks at the principles. We identified 8 distinct sets of principles, practices, how you can apply those principles in the adaptive management cycle, and then some examples and examples in example tools and facilitation tips that have been proven, and examples from real-life case studies. And we're very glad to have one of our real-life case studies actually joining this call. Hi, Scott. Second of it, we are producing another volume that talks about similar things, but takes a different perspective. And that is more of a practical guidance document that seeks to be used before and during a planning project. So this is really kind of when you are already kind of moving into the thick of it. And that looks and takes a perspective. It looks at the adaptive management step, and the unifying umbrella across us all here on this call are the conservation standards, which we use as our approach to adaptive management. So it looks at the conservation standard steps and then considers what principle and what practices should you consider when you are in this step of the adaptive management process. And to support those 2 guidance documents, we developed as well 2 tools, pre-planning and team readiness tool. That, as the name suggests, is a tool that you would use at the outset when your project is in the pre-planning phase. So before you actually engage properly in planning and before any action occurs. And it looks in this pre-planning step at the principles and the application in adaptive management. And then we have as well the spectrum of engagement tool, which on the other hand is a tool that you use when you are already in the project. Your project has commenced, you're in one of the adaptive management phases, or your project may have already been around for a long time and you've just done your first round and you are at a midterm review, at a full-term review, but you want to just check in, where are we, how are we engaging, and how can we improve in particular our engagement with Indigenous people and local communities to support their leadership in their conservation initiative. So that's kind of the 4 tools or the 4 things we want to talk about today. And let me just jump straight into the principles in the first part. For this, we did a long literature research review. We looked at human rights literature, partnering literature, literature around free, prior, informed consent, and protection of indigenous knowledge, and all kinds of different things. We worked through a whole number of documents, and we distilled out what are the common denominators, what are the key things that all those documents speak about. And that helped us land on 8 principles that I will bring up now. I'm not going to talk about them much in detail right on this slide. We're going to dive deeper on the next few slides on them. Those principles are not sequential or prioritized. They don't come in they're just principles. The reason for that is why we're stepping away from prioritizing, and we strongly believe that it's not only one principle that makes a difference, it is the combination of them that really empowers and supports community leadership. So in most cases, we assume it is an orchestra of multiple, if not all, of those principles that I'm just slowly bringing up on the screen. They're neither sequential that you need to do them on your first step and then you can forget about them and they never show up again. Adaptive management is a cycle, and some of those principles pop up throughout the cycle at different times. Some of those principles are as well foundational and they apply consistently throughout all the steps at every point. Some are a little bit more specific and they have more significance in a specific adaptive management step. So let's have a look a little bit more what hides behind those words. And I try to find the balance between keeping it as short and neat as possible, but to give you enough background so that the tools and that we're going to talk about make sense. So for example, and I'm not going into the same depths for every single one of them, for the foundational principle of trust and relations, of good engagement based on respect and transparency and humility. This is a foundational principle. And this principle has different ways how it can pop up, how it can be implemented, and which are the practices for this principle. One of those practices, for example, is around engaging regularly, early, and transparently in good faith to build relationships and foster continuity. There are certain ways what we can do as planning practitioners, how we can weave those principles and those practices into our daily work. And those are the little dot points that we highlighted in the light turquoise box at the bottom. So for example, what we all know from the conservation standards, never make your first workshop your first encounter. Like, you need to build trust and relationship. People are not willing to share if they only met you 5 minutes ago. And like that, there are other facilitation tips and techniques. We don't want to spend a significant amount of time right now in those, as we will populate them as well as we go through. Another practice for this principle is around recognizing community protocols and community priorities and co-designing a process before content, not just coming up with a plan already and with a project and nicely stacked away when you arrive in a community, but it's about creating those things together and figuring out and weaving in those priorities, ensuring that a project and a conservation initiative responds to the needs on the ground. Similar to this principle, I'll give you another example a little bit longer and then we'll rush through them quicker, is around free, prior, informed consent. FPIC is something that is always on the front of our minds, the explicit right to give and withhold consent throughout the process, which again is not a check-in that only happens once, but this is a continuous process throughout the project. And consent may be withdrawn at a different point, at a different phase in a project that has previously been granted. That's something we need to consider. So In order to implement free, prior, informed consent, a few practices would be around facilitating a meaningful dialogue and revisit and review consent and respecting the right to review consent. Facilitation tips that come to mind are like consent roadmaps and iterative validation cycles to validate, but also to adjust. And as part of the process, to do a regular plus and delta to kind of to check how you are tracking. Really, really crucial is to identify and confirm the legitimate rights holder in the first instance and identify their decision-making structures prior to any engagement. And that is kind of, as we all know, when you in the space you're working in, there's often many, many different layers, and it is figuring out which are those rights holders that we need to focus, that we need to engage with, who have the legitimate right for the territories we're planning for. Tools like that could be like desktop researches, but there are as well a number of really incredible web services like Landmark and Native Lands that give people or give projects at least a starting point to inquire, to look at. And the last one in this set of practices is around providing information that can actually be understood by communities in a language, in a format that is clear, so that people actually, that everyone in the room talks about the same thing and understands what they're consenting to or not. And this has a lot to do with developing a communication plan early on to ensure that outputs are in the right format to make those considerations. But this is also about allowing for sufficient time to provide feedback between and during the workshops. Don't come with an agenda that is so jam-packed that you give people only 2 minutes to respond when you work with local communities. Equally, don't engage in a project that needs to be wrapped up in 6 weeks and expecting that a community just is available and runs because the project funder requires that. Just a few of those kind of subtle ways of implementing. I've kind of spent a little longer on those first two principles to give you an idea, this principle, practice, and the tips for the next ones to give us enough time to actually inquire and look into the tools. I will speed that up a little bit and not talk so much about the facilitation tips. Our third principle is around self-determination and governance, recognizing the rights holders and the decision makers in the process. Sorry. It's about providing resources and capacity to strengthen governance and support transparent decision making and build local capacity. What is very strongly as well showing up in our case studies, how much that makes a difference with projects. And about honoring the, oops, sorry, I'm having problems with my Zoom account at the same time here. Honoring local decision-making structures to uphold authority, autonomy, and sovereignty. So ensuring that you actually work through the right decision-making circles and processes and protocols that the community has determined. The fourth principle around diversity and respect. This is around ensuring the who in the process to ensure that you have diverse participation across age groups, gender groups, different social groups, and acknowledge and respect all their experiences, worldviews, and cosmologies. It's about creating safe and respectful places so that people can participate in a good way and in a way they feel comfortable in to share their voices, to share their thoughts and their ideas. And it's also about amplifying those underrepresented voices throughout the planning into the implementation process. So ensuring that the voices of underrepresented voices are heard when it comes to decision making. If this is the who, ensuring that you have the right diversity, the next principle around equity inclusion is linked, but this is more about the how. Like to ensure we have the right structures in place that people can participate in an equitable and an inclusive way. And this is around using accessible and relevant planning tools, addressing structural barriers to participation and leadership by the way how you organize your workshops, how you design your project to ensure that some of those structural barriers are addressed and reduced and considered. And also to support equitable benefit sharing mechanisms so that the benefits from the planning of a project and the outcomes of a project are shared equitably across the community you're working with, and considering some of those structural barriers that you have identified previously. The recognition of knowledge is a very obvious one. It's around protecting intellectual property rights to ensure that the sensitive information Indigenous people contribute to a process, and that it is clear how it is used and how it is looked after, who's looking after it, and all those processes. So it's around the legal protections, but it's also about validating and elevating this Indigenous and local community knowledge. This is not just a little anecdotal thing on the side. This is a knowledge system that has matured over thousands and thousands of years and has an incredible practice associated with it. So this is equal. This is just side by side with other contemporary knowledge systems, Western science, for example. And last but not least, adapting those planning tools and concepts that we're using to ensure we can incorporate and represent knowledge, which has been one of the major adaptations of the conservation standards when it has been applied with First Nation communities. We're coming closely to an end, 2 more to go. And there is the principle of accountability, adaptability, and learning. And that is around, I guess, ensuring that plans, we are doing adaptive management. So it is a circular phase that kind of goes on and on, that when you do change and adjust your plans, that you do this together with the community, that the community is involved, and those adjustments are based around community feedback, whether we have achieved goals, whether we have gotten to reduce threats. This needs to be happen not in isolation, but with the community or the lands you're working with. It's around ensuring that how you assess your environment and how you measure it, and how you evaluate, that those indicators are co-designed and are also inclusive of Indigenous knowledge. And I guess that the review, that you have a regular review and a regular communication back to the group to keep them on track. And this is not something from 10 years ago, a community needs to remember what they said, but this is an ongoing engagement where those pieces of information are fed back regularly. And our last principle we identified is around ensuring that cultural identity is honored in external settings and contexts. So in multi-stakeholder processes where you have administrative entities, NGOs, other people, other non-Indigenous or non-local groups in there to ensure that Indigenous people in local communities can maintain their cultural identity in those settings and contexts. So it's about ensuring that engagement practices adapt to cultural norms and values, and that language, ceremony, storytelling, other things that are associated with local culture and the communities are strong in this kind of a multi-stakeholder environment. And yeah, that help everyone to kind of to focus on the core things and the important priorities of community and understanding how they define community, how they define those priorities. So this was a lot in a nutshell. And those are 8 principles. All of those principles, as you recall, have like 2 or 3 practices, key practices associated with them, and then a lot of tips and ways how you can implement them as a facilitator, as a conservation practitioner. And how are we using this information now in those 2 volumes I just spoke about? So volume 1, that takes the principle point of view. We will list those 8 principles, provide a longer definition than what I just did very briefly on this call. Why it matters, why is this an important principle, where does it come from? And then list those different practices. How can a conservation project implement those principles? And we want to give an example from 3 real-life case studies to show you how others worked around and how in other regions of the world people went about implementing those principles. And for that, we got 3 case studies that we include in those guidance materials. They are in each of the chapters, kind of in small parts only as they relate to the principle, but at the end of the document, we want to have included those 3 case studies. I have another slide for that later on, but since we're talking about them now, so the 3 case studies, we tried to spread them geographically across the globe to reflect the diversity of projects. Brandis is working with a project in Peru that is doing life planning there and condensing the lessons that they have learned from their engagement in Peru. We have 1 case study from Hawaii where we have Scott on this call, who was very helpful in getting all the information together with his team from the Maui Nui network. And we have as well 1 real-life case study from Australia that is based in the very northwest of Australia, where we look at healthy country planning and development by design. And those 3 case studies together, they illuminate all those principles. And we want to give a quick reference to facilitation tip and to an activity. I spoke already about that, so this slide we can jump. And then coming to the second volume, which is a practical guidance. So there, as we all know the conservation standards in and out, you can see on the right side of the frame and the different conservation standard steps that have been borrowed from the LIDAR conservation standards and the conservation standards cookbook, which we think are amazing resources and tools. And there we want to provide on a few pages for each step why you would do the steps, how you would go about doing it, keeping that part really, really narrow and rather linking to the respective steps in the conservation standards. We're not trying to replicate all that. We're trying to augment, because the more important part there is like, so what are those principles that apply to those steps? Either the foundational that apply foundationally or the step-specific principles, and how are practices applying to those steps. Want to provide facilitation tips, a reference in each case to a case study where you can look into more deeper. And we're hoping to give 2 options, like just a basic option and a richer option, how you can go even deeper. This being a practitioner tool, we need to keep this, and we heard you from previous webinars, we need to keep this accessible and good. So for that purpose, we're kind of working a lot with color schemes, as much as with icons to help facilitate and make that quicker and easier to handle when you're in the field. Also acknowledging that people come from a lot of different backgrounds and will apply this in a lot of different ways. That is kind of in a nutshell what the bones and the skeleton, I guess, from the work that Valentina, Stuart, and I did over the last few months. And you definitely have heard way too much from me right now. So I would like to hand over to you, Valentina, and then to Stuart to quickly introduce the tools that you have worked on and developed, and to set us up for the breakout rooms.
Thank you so much, Frank. So to do all these principles and practices doable and easy to do in the land with the people and the projects, we have been thinking in 2 key tools. We're going to present it right now. One of the tools that is the pre-planning and team readiness tool, focused on Indigenous people and local communities projects. So, what is this tool? This tool is a decision tree that guides teams throughout the critical step before any project begins. Establish the trust, equality, clarity, and shared understanding all across the project with Indigenous people and local communities. It also connects the project teams with practical facilitation tips, key questions, also core steps who are going to guide all across this pre-planning and readiness phase. So also what is the purpose? It's to define right before these key principles in order to have all the foundations of the ethical partnerships clear before starting. Also, so when it's going to be used, just at the beginning of the project, and also what is the purpose of that, so what is going to be the outcomes that it supports. It's going to be a tool who help us to create the consent roadmap. That means all the decisions required to consent, who is giving the consent, who is available to say no during the process. And that is the basis also to a co-design process, focusing on first of we will work together, we will be inclusive throughout all the community and all of the parties interested. Also had the readiness statements. That means has the clearly outlines expectations and boundaries before starting the all the process, initiative, and project. And also, and so important is who is going to be able to use it. So we have divided the tool into key actors, who is going to be the community members, or also the community-based organizations, also external partners, such like NGOs, government, and also is going to be directed to funders or grantees that is going to be supporting these initiatives of Indigenous people and local community leaderships. And the core conservation standard elements focused on is clarifying the scope, designing all the team and process, and be ready to continue. So that is one of the tools that we wanted to share to you to receive all the feedback to the building of this tool and the whole process guidance and the other tool. We put in the reality all the outputs that you gave us in previous webinars. So right now we wanted to test to you and show to you the tools and all the outcomes to receive the feedback. And we are more than open to continue co-creating with you. So that's from my side of pre-planning, planning tool. Maybe Stuart, you can go ahead with the other one, please.
Sure thing. Thanks, Valentina, and thanks everybody for coming along. So the second tool, as it says, the spectrum of engagement. So as we all know, there's a range of engagement that we do or that is done in projects when working with anybody, but First Nations, Indigenous peoples, and local communities. And this tool is really more of an evaluative assessment sort of tool that then guides you for improvement. So it helps you to identify where you are in a range of engagement, from purely controlled by external actors all the way through to community control and direction. And so the idea of the tool, try and keep it very simple, but as a way to quickly assess where a project is at from different perspectives, in terms of how it's engaging with people in relation to the principles. So looking through the principles. Are we applying those principles at a high enough degree of engagement? It can, like all these tools and any tools in conservation standards, it's out there for anybody to use. We're trying to make it as accessible as possible, so it could be used by communities themselves and community groups. Probably its primary audience is, practitioners, project teams, NGOs, organisations who are looking at projects to try and sort of see how they're going or what's happening, and to diagnose if there are issues. So that's used as part of self-assessment. Just check in on a project every now and again. Can apply it at any stage, pre, post, so on, and it will help to guide you from, if we're down here in this sort of spectrum of engagement, how do we improve? So it's intended to provide some guidance and link to the work that Frank particularly was talking about before in terms of those practitioner guides. Okay, well, do this, do that. That might help. So that's the spectrum.
Wonderful. Thanks, Stuart. So now we're going to jump into the exciting part of this project, and we're going to look at those tools and what is behind them. And for that, we will break into 3 groups. There will be one group that remains in the plenary with Stuart. This group will have simultaneous translations. If you want to learn more about the spectrum of engagement, just remain in the room and don't go into one of the breakout rooms. If you want to learn more about the tool Valentina just presented, we created 2 breakout rooms, one in Spanish, one in English. There will be no translation in those breakout rooms, so choose wisely which one you're going to. We will keep all those rooms open for, I'd say, a maximum of 30 minutes to give us enough time to come back and then talk about next steps. There will be a warning 2 minutes before the rooms close, automatically coming up. I don't think, I will see if I can make a 5 minutes broadcast. I'll see how we go. And for the breakout rooms and for this next part of the session, we're going to use the Miro board. And can I please ask Stuart or Valentina to please put our link in the chat for everyone to come there.
Yeah.
On the Miro board.
Popped it in there, everyone. So it's in the chat. Valentina's put it there, and I can see a few people appearing there.
Cool. All right. And when you come into this chat, let me just bring us all to the right session. I will just make you all come to me for now, so that we all find ourselves on the board in the right place. And I will open the rooms. So choose your room. There is an English version, a Spanish version, and Stuart's bilingual version.
Well, bilingual because there's an interpreter, not bilingual because of me.
Oh, you speak Australian, you speak English, you speak Tasmanian. So I'll leave the main room now. Stuart, I'll be in. Hey, Tara. Hey, Leah. Hey, Autumn. Hey, Ayman. Nice to... Hi, Tala. Oh, okay, there's too many people. I stopped saying hi to everyone now. Great to have you in this breakout room. So you have chosen, and I hope voluntarily, what you wanted. We're going to look at the pre-planning and team readiness tool on the Miro board in English, which right now let me just see, who of you has at the moment problems accessing the Miro board? Is there anyone lost between software platforms? Are you all with me on Miro together? Okay. And do you all see on your screen, I assume that might be you, Leah, as our commonplace here. I'm not sure, there might be more our commonplaces. And since we have Stuart as well, there is a frame that is called IP&LCs Pre-Planning and Readiness Tool Americas, where a few of you are already on. So that's the frame we are talking about. It's got a kind of a greenish frame around it. So as we said, this tool is kind of, as Valentina just mentioned, the tool is for the pre-planning phase, the team readiness, before groups start getting engaged in a project, before you do any planning, when you just are setting up your project. If you want a little bit more detail on it, you can as well click on the slides button, and those 8 boxes up there become actually a small little slideshow. But I can talk you through those things as well, since we want to focus in particular on the feedback side of things. The tool is set up in a kind of in 2 sets. There are gateway questions that will help determine where you are sitting with your project. As Valentina was saying, this tool is set up for 3 different, I guess, branches, avenues. And those first few questions kind of put you into the right setting. And through those questions, you determine either you are a community member or community representative using the pre-planning tool. You are from an environmental NGO, third party who works, collaborates, supports a community to do a project, or you are a funder who looks at proposals for work with communities. And the beginning kind of those gateway questions create this context. And then once you've responded to them, you will be in one of those branches. And on a branch, you will be brought through 6 different core questions. The way it works, it's a decision tree. So the core questions are, I guess, basically yes/no questions. When you click yes, you proceed to the next question. When you click no, it gives you some guidance and some hints how you could improve, what you could do to address this issue where that has come up. That's kind of the overarching way how the tool works. And when you kind of go a little bit closer to further down to the time to give feedback part, I have put as well in here screenshots of the different questions that you would work through. And we have as well on the side sticky notes around things that people like, that people think are handy. Things where you reckon, ooh, we need to do a bit more homework, the orange ones, or suggestions for stuff that we have not considered, what is a good chance as well. So the idea is to get from you guys as much feedback as possible. We fully appreciate also that this is not something that can be done in 30 minutes. This Miro board and the tool and everything will be available for everyone later on to play and to provide feedback, because I guess, yeah, that's normally where the good feedback as well comes from, when people have a chance to apply it in their project. I will just very quickly share my screen and show you how the tool looks. You can see as well at the bottom there is a little download link that brings you to a Google site. You don't have to use it right now. You can, though, if you cannot hold out. So let me show you that tool. In an ideal world, you can see my screen right now. So as you go about it, as I said, there are gateway questions first up, asking you, are you using the tool at the right time? we haven't yet started our project. And it is a project actually that intersects with the territories of Indigenous people and local communities. So that helps us to initiate to start this one off. And then this is actually a project that an environmental NGO has proposed. So we use the second option for that. And I'm just pretending I'm from an environmental NGO. And I like pretending things. Those are the gateway questions. And now we are at this point where we begin the pathway. That has settled us on the right branch of the tool. So an external branch, we're looking at those questions from the viewpoint of an NGO, of a non-Indigenous, non-community organization. And then you go through those 6 core actions. Listening to the territories. First of all, have you kind of developed a foundation of trust and prior listening? Are the priorities of the communities that inhabit and that look after those territories that you're planning for, have they been incorporated? If you say yes, the tool just jumps to the next question and you can always go back. If you say no, it kind of it comes up with those little cards that give you some specific questions to consider. It talks about key components, facilitation tips and activities, what you can do. And it gives you as well a due diligence tab for people like, this is in particular for the funding one, where you can kind of just tick off to make sure that you have considered all those aspects. The information on those cards is still developed, so we're still working on then making and fine-tuning and in particular fine-tuning them against all the different deliverables. As you have done those things on the cards and you said, I've reviewed this, continue, you jump to the next question. And then same thing, if you say yes, you go to the third question. If you say no, you're gonna get more of those cards. The reason why we went down the element of the cards is we needed to create a tool as well that can work outside of a computer. Yes, computers take over our life, but in our world, working with Indigenous people in local communities, computers are not always the right tool. So this whole tool exists as well in a kind of an analog way with cards and that you can use in a workshop environment and for those circumstances where a computer is not appropriate. As you work through the entire tool, just kind of quickly rushing through it, you come at the end, you get what we call a checkpoint, where it picks up on all those questions where you said no. And it gives you again, when you work through the entire tool, it kind of links you back to the different hints, guidances, thoughts to help address this issue. So yeah, that's in a super quick nutshell, this tool. As I said before, we will make it, well, I haven't said this properly before. So after this workshop, when we had the first lot of feedback on what we have produced, we're going to make some small updates. We hope that by Friday, we will share this tool with everyone in an email that have registered so that people can use it and can inquire in it in more detail. And so that people can provide feedback on the Miro board on those things. That is me talking way too much. So I will just stop for a second here and stop sharing my screen and go back to our Miro board and just see if you guys have any verbal feedback. Please do add as many post-it notes, as many thoughts. All your thoughts are gold. Don't be shy. If you have difficult thoughts or complex thoughts, it would be super helpful if you maybe put in your initials, because that helps us then, if you have a question, if you don't understand something, to trace back from who that came. Jim, yes, that looks like. So this is exactly that down there is the access to the tool for this workshop. So I hate pulling up individuals, but since I have you in my group, Brandy, um, do you want to maybe share so that we hear from people a little bit? Do you want to maybe share like a first thought now that you have kind of, I guess, the first time, or not the first, but early on seen the tool?
Yeah, sure. So I'm the one that pops up as Barker, everyone. But yes, this is Brandy. So I've taken just a cursory look at it, and I think it's looking really nice and accessible. I'm looking forward, as I said in the comments, to kind of really getting into the details and seeing how it functions and what the content is specifically. But I have some just super high level thoughts about the organization. I like the filtering questions that kind of direct us onto certain paths. I think that's going to be very helpful. I have a logistical question for you. What platform was this designed on? Because I'm thinking about the maintenance of the tool itself and how it might evolve over time with practitioner use and feedback and how easy that will be to update. So I'm curious, is this a Microsoft Forms product or I don't
No,
know? Yeah.
this is programmed with code. This is Python script.
Okay.
But put it this way, you're bringing up there a really important point that is not only for this tool, but for all the outputs. In our CCNet world, I guess we are continuously improving. So there is a continuous learning pathway involved in there. I guess our hope is that we get the first iteration of the tool that is as close as possible for good use. The updates later on for the tools, but for all the other resources are definitely required at a certain after a certain review phase, like after having given people a chance to apply it and use it. The updates themselves are relatively simple, like it does not require a program or anything. We're doing that all ourselves. So the technical skills are not immense, but it is definitely important that with all those resources that we consider the requirement to update after a while. So we need to kind of make sure that we put that effort in. But what we do as CCNet anyway, like as we do with the conservation standards, the revisions there, this is I guess a continuous thing of updating and working on.
Mm-hmm. I think it's great, and you had already mentioned, the need for an analog version to accompany this too. So there's always, that to fall back on when the digital version is not available.
Yeah, there is, but put it this way, we will keep the digital version available one way or the other. This is a given. There's many tools and in the conservation standards world that are maintained as well. There is, when you talk about digital things, always the maintenance aspect involved, like when browsers change and the infrastructure changes around us that we need to keep it updated. But we chosen a very, very basic format that should reduce the need as much as possible. And with important feedback, like from you guys right now, for example, from Becky on the wording, we were trying to nut out in this first iteration as many of those issues as possible.
Yeah, and another reaction that I had, but I could definitely document it in the mural board, is just, thoughts about within the context of the tool itself, expanding on some of the definitions that are embedded or implied in the questions for people that might need, for example, that filtering question about, is this a project that is on the territories of Indigenous peoples or local communities? We may need to just tie back to the principles or pull out the definition so that the distinction between those two is evident and available right there within the context of asking the question. Or maybe there's a need to clarify, are we talking about customary or formal territories? Is it formal recognition that's required, or is it just customary? Like those kinds of distinctions, I think might be important to include in the extra detail of the question. Yeah.
Really, really good point. Thanks, Peeps. And yeah, thanks, Leah. You hit hit the nerve there, Brandy. And yes, this is kind of a first prototype, and that's exactly kind of why we're doing those sessions, to get that, because we always suffer from the thing once you are knee deep in a matter that you don't see sometimes those obvious things anymore. Because I cannot think, I cannot form a thought anymore that does not include a principle or a practice at the moment, having looked at this stuff for a 10-month period now. So thank you. I'm not sure from whom this one comment is. Is there a way to highlight that rights holders may not always be those who have the legal ownership and rights? Yes, so this, I think, kind of speaks to the point that Brandy just made, where we need to, in the prompts for those questions, make that more specific on one hand, like in the prompt itself, but we will as well, for that specific part, probably create some hard links to the other products and outputs to provide as well more narrative there. We looked at Becky's comment around the wording already, and yes, we will improve that. And similar, like the comment about unclear what legitimate means. Again, this is a defining, clarifying thing here to do. That's all fine as well.
So Frank, I had another like just basic question, but I haven't like been able to work through the draft tool just yet. But you had mentioned that you get kind of a summary checklist that kind of list out all the things that were responded no to, so that they have like a quick reference sheet to guidance and additional tips and stuff. Is there because I imagine this tool may be done multiple times over throughout. Well, it's a pre-planning thing, but it might be done by, yeah, but it might be done by different individuals within an organization or within a community or within somehow associated with the project. So is there a way of like also mapping out the responses that were made to the questions, not just, I guess it's kind of implied, right, by the ones that are no's. You assume the other ones were yeses, and that's that, right?
Yeah, so I guess so there is, unfortunately, and this is probably I guess the limitations of programming that we have, there is not a way that we can export. So this kind of a reporting out, Brandy, when you look on the screenshots, is the one on the most right on the top there, that the readiness checkpoint.
Let me go there. I was on the other screen. Okay.
And we don't have at the moment a way of exporting this into something external, because it links back to the cards that are in the Python script in there. So the analog version, it would work a lot easier. For this one, we need to have a look what is technologically possible to create an export. I do not want to promise right now anything, but it's a valid point to bring up. There is slightly a methodological aspect to your question as well. Normally, you don't do the pre-planning as an individual solely by yourself. Like from a methodological side of things, you do this with your core team already, like with whoever else is undertaking that. That might be your funder, that might be a community representative as well in there, if you have that already established.
Okay, so that's helpful, because that would already be like a consensus opinion among the individuals in the group. Yeah.
Yeah, but nevertheless, you are not wrong with your observation. There is no worries, Autumn. Thanks for making it. There is definitely a need to kind of to consider that. And Stuart has the same issue with the spectrum. For his tool, it's even more applicable, but by choosing Excel for the second tool, this is a lot easier to create than to use Python script. But we'll look into it. Let's leave it at that for now. We can see whether there is a simple way how we can get Python to export those ratings. Okay, I'm just looking now as well through the chat. Libby, that's an important point. We'll look into that language issue as well. Oh yeah, Heather dropped out, I think, already as well. Thanks for joining. And in case Heather and Autumn are still here, you will have access and you will get a follow-up email after this workshop as well, so that you do not miss out on anything. We have about 6 minutes or so left in this kind of a breakout group. Are there any kind of other verbal or any other feedback that you want to give us and while we are in the small group together?
Frank, can you speak a little bit to how the group settled on the kind of the themes of the core actions?
Yeah, sure. So this is an interplay of two kind of streams that created that selection. We started off, I guess it started off with the distilling the principles and the practices and creating that kind of a matrix as a first step. And then we looked at that matrix and intersected it with the pre-planning and team readiness tool that is already in the conservation standards as well. And kind of created this cross-section, I guess, between those two aspects that is around which of those principles do we need to consider in the pre-planning phase when we talk about setting up our team and setting up our project. And that is, yeah, I guess how the 6 core questions, core action areas came out.
Awesome.
And regarding this one comment about the list of activities and guidances having more details, absolutely. This is our intent. This is what we're currently nutting out and making work. Because I guess there's two aspects to it. There's one, we need to kind of settle on the same activities that each of the outputs and documents kind of identifies the same ones. And then equally to find the sweet spot between what is enough and what is too little information. We totally appreciate that a word is not enough information, in particular when we think about this is a tool that is used by people who may be new to this whole topic and may not be so experienced in this space. One of the things we are struggling with, and to give you an idea what we're kind of focusing on, if you have a lot of hyperlinks and that outdates a document very, very quickly or a tool. Hyperlinks are sweet. They work very neatly as long as the resource that you're linking to remains in the same spot. To address a little bit this issue, and this is not only regarding this tool, but regarding all the other outputs as well, because we're referring to a lot of other documents. We decided we want to focus on stable tools and stable kind of things that have been around for a long time. And we will try, and we need to talk to Christina about that a bit more as well. We will try to make sure that we can keep them all in a similar space within our CCNet servers or CMP servers, where a lot of the conservation standards archives are. This is kind of this is probably the way to go about it. Like we need to find a pathway between hard links rather than hyperlinks, but also kind of seeing whether we can relate to some of the more stable tools that have been sitting in the conservation standards universe for a longer time that haven't shifted and moved too much. But that's still something as well to consider. And we are soon gonna get the countdown for our last 2 minutes. It totally depends on whether you guys want to. We're gonna do a quick kind of feedback report back session when we go back into the plenary. I'm more than happy to talk about things that you brought up, but equally, if one of you wants to speak up, let me know, and you can also do the report back. Doesn't need to be a big one. We don't have an incredible amount of time left. Like a 1 or 2 minute recap is what we kind of are trying to capture this conversation in. Sure, Brandy, I can do that. No problem. Well, we're about to go back into the main room. I'll see you all there. Thanks so much for your feedback and for looking at the tool.
Thanks all.
I think we're being joined by.
Oh, we are.
Stuart, you've been talking about us, I heard. We just wanted to see what you've been. Have you been bad-mouthing me again?
Only good things. We were just about to have a long and fruitful conversation about the joys of Excel, I think.
Oh gosh, I didn't want to interrupt that. Keep going, guys. Keep going.
That's okay.
Thanks, everyone. I do believe that Valentina's group, let me just see if I can see her here. She made her way back.
Not here yet, I think. Oh, here they come.
Okay. Can you see them? Oops.
No, it's still not here, actually.
What happened to Valentina's breakout room?
No idea, because the option to join the breakout rooms is gone.
I don't know what.
Lost
Let me
in
just write her a
cyberspace.
message.
Lost in the matrix, huh?
Well, while we just sending her a WhatsApp message and see. Oh no, there is. What happens? Why is Valentina not closing her room? Okay, yeah, it looks like nobody is in the room. Ah, there is Valentina. Great.
Yeah, we are back.
Cool. So we have 10 minutes or 9 minutes left. I'd say if that is possible, if each of the rooms can do just a 1 minute, 2 minute consolidated feedback, that would be amazing. I'm gonna quickly start off to speed that up. So I was looking at the pre-planning team readiness tool with the English-speaking group of the room. We had all a play with it. We had a look at it. We did some, and it was really good feedback from everyone. So thank you everybody in my breakout room. A few had to run to other meetings who are not anymore with us in the plenary. And we got a lot of good feedback and regarding language. And this is kind of one of the things, I guess, that the three of us need to kind of focus on. We're so deep into the jargon that we've been using that we don't necessarily always see that whether things are awkward and how they look from different perspectives. So we had a really good feedback from a few people regarding ways how we phrase certain aspects and that we need to improve to make it clearer for different geographies, regions, points of views. We have equally a number of really good ideas around putting more definitions in to make it clearer, to put some more content in to make the facilitation tips, questions and things like that more tangible and more meaningful rather than having them as one word. And as we said in the breakout group as well, those are only prototypes. Like this is exactly why we're doing the session right now, to nut out those obvious issues that you, I guess, lose sight of when you are too deep in the matter. But yeah, overall, people were really happy and think this is a really strong tool. So well done, and thanks everyone to my breakout group. And over to you, Valentina. How did the Spanish version of the tool work?
Thank you, Frank, and thank you for all the members of my group. It was really interesting, our discussions. And actually, it was really interesting from my point of view because we were highlighting also, for example, the language and the flexibility and adaptability that we have to have during all this process. So, for example, we work on this tool that is based basically in English to Spanish, and we highlight the importance of translating all these tools into the local language. In this case, Spanish, but in other cases, local languages and native dialects that they have, all the languages that they have, and be clear also about the acronyms that we used. Something that related that Frank said, like trying to have all the definitions, all the kind of detail, but trying to not be overwhelmed with that. Also, we will discuss about the flexibility of the tool because of the uses that we can give it in different geographies and with different actors. So the importance to have, I have my notes here, to try to have as principle flexibility and adaptability because of the tools. We have some limitations because of the structure of the tools. But if we have the flexibility and adaptability as principle, we should or we could also adapt these tools to different processes, to different levels also of engagements of the communities and all the leadership that they have. Also, we highlight about the balance of powers. That's really important in the moment to, for example, Lucho and Alexis shared to us different cases in Peru and in Africa that maybe the leaderships that the communities have could be in conflict and how we could lead it. But essentially is how to be adaptative, and how we can lead it to being like with clear with the limitation that this phase could be and the scope that could have. So that's the things that I would like to highlight and share to you and complement that Frank shared. But essentially, it was a useful conversation throughout the tool, also to share with people who is beginning through all this process. So that's from our side. Stuart, from your tool and your multiple languages, how it goes.
Yeah, thanks, Valentina. Thanks everyone for coming along to the Spectrum session. Look, I think the translation went okay. I stopped a couple of times to see if it was keeping up, and everyone seemed to think it was keeping up all right. And the translator was able to translate some comments back, which was terrific. We only had a couple of comments because I think people need a bit more time to, really look through what's been produced and think about it. Generally positive. The main comment was about very consistent with what you've both said, which is about language and accessibility of language and sort of the kind of volume issue. There's a lot of material, a lot of things to think about, and how can this be? Yeah. So yes, it seems useful, but how can we make it more accessible? So I think that's just a general challenge that you've both identified and that we need to think about. And yeah, we're just about to have a conversation. I was just testing the waters on, particularly with the Spectrum tool, using something like Excel. Is that a good distribution mechanism? But we didn't quite get through that. So be valuing thoughts on that as well. But just how do we fix the language so that it balances that issue between being accurate and effective and understood? It's going to be a challenge. So thanks everyone.
Thanks, Stuart. And yeah, extending thanks to everyone for all your valuable feedback. This is kind of how we improve tools and how we improve our practice through the collective input from many different views, the power of CCNet. We're coming to the end of our webinar. I've just posted in the chat a message. As we suggested earlier on, we do not expect that we can wrap up all the feedback in a quick 30-minute breakout session, and that would be ridiculous. We are striving to make some basic updates based on some of your feedback as soon as possible. And by the end of the week, we want to send to everyone who registered for those 2 webinars this week, in an email, a link to the recordings on our YouTube channel, for those who couldn't listen to the sessions. Also a link to where the tools can be downloaded, so that you can try out more. And as we promised, we're going to keep the Miro board open, and we're going to put that link to the Miro board both into that email, but also posting it on our homepage, that you can always come back for the next little while to provide some feedback to help us shape a first credible iteration of those tools and of those guidances. So, and I guess, and with that, I would like to as well hand over to Sebastian for any final words from his point of view. In a similar way, with all those resources we showed beforehand, they are at the moment right now work in progress. We will do our utmost and our best to wrap them up and package them up into something over the coming few weeks and kind of early in 2025. But maybe, Sebastian, you can kind of tell us a little bit what your thoughts are around how those resources, once we get from the prototype to the first iteration, you can see to be shared.
Thank you, Frank, and thank you all back again for your time doing this webinar. These tools are, well, being developed right now for this consortium, and these are for the conservation practitioners. So for every person that or organization that's interested in working in promoting Indigenous and community-led conservation, and bringing and supporting this empowerment and self-determination of what's happening on Indigenous territories. So we are trying to develop simple and accessible tools for all that can be adapted to different contexts. And with our timeline, we would be searching to have the first draft of these tools by the beginning of February next year. So we will send this around on TNC's internal network and also CCNet and through the listservs and the context list that people that have participated in the process. And we will keep this idea of having these tools open for incorporating improvements while we continue to develop them. So thanks again for everyone for your participation and for your feedback, and we'll keep in touch on next steps.
Thank you, Sebastian. Thank you as well, Bilingual, for the great translations for today. And yeah, thanks to everyone who found a way of putting 90 minutes today aside to provide feedback. This is much appreciated. Thank you all, and we will be in the next few days in touch with you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Gracias.
Gracias a todos y
Bye.
todas. Ciao.
Thank you. Congratulations. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Gustavo. Thanks, Tara.